Harvey's wrath. The President and First Lady travel to Texas as the state tries to recover from the hurricane's devastation. Plus one priest's story of courage in the face of the flood. Venezuelan vandalism. The bishop's conference offices in Caracas are broken into as the country's crisis continues. Fighting for her son. A personal story of how Russia's decision to block adoptions into the U.S. has impacted families. EWTN in the UK. We celebrate the opening of our new studios at the Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. We'll talk to the shrine's rector. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 29th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is asking for volunteers to help Texas recover from Harvey. Thousands are still waiting to be rescued as the flood waters continue to rise across the southeast part of the state. We're learning a police officer has died after he became trapped in his patrol car while driving to work. This all comes on the 12th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina's landfall in Louisiana. Desperate rescue operations underway across flood-ravaged southeast Texas. At least 3,000 people were rescued yesterday alone, but countless others are still stranded in their homes.
They keep telling us, I guess now that there's a mandatory evacuation around the area, all the roads are closed, there's really no way to get out.
First responders, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the entire Texas National Guard have been deployed. Authorities are overwhelmed with calls for help.
The biggest issue right now is just time. Getting to everyone that we need to get to.
Citizens are taking action with their own boats.
They would be on the second story screaming out loud at us. We could hear them over the loud motors of the airboats.
About 8,000 people are estimated to be in shelters across the city, and authorities expect the number of evacuees to grow to at least 30,000. More than 2 feet of rain has already fallen, and another 2 could fall in the coming days. Rivers and waterways have begun cresting, and there are major concerns levees will breach.
We have to prepare ourselves for a circumstance similar to what we had with Katrina.
President Trump makes an all-out push to show the federal government's responsiveness to the massive storm. He spent the afternoon in Corpus Christi, where he was briefed on relief efforts. Correspondent Mark Irons reports on his visit from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president did not want to fly into Houston so as not to disturb the large-scale rescue operations taking place there. But today, he did see the resolve of Texas as hundreds turned out to cheer him on.
President Trump arrives to see the Texas response to Harvey. The storm marks the first time his administration has been tested by a major natural disaster.
This was of epic proportion. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. And I just want to say that working with the governor and his entire team has been an honor for us.
In Corpus Christi, the president was briefed on relief efforts with the Coast Guard, local law enforcement, and organizations like the Red Cross. The governor of Texas says he's pleased with Trump's response to the historic hurricane.
Our response to this challenge has been made much more effective because of the very effective way the president and his staff has helped Texas respond to this challenge. So, Mr. President, thank you. Thank you. Welcome to Texas.
The president says the $3 billion balance in the Federal Emergency Management Agency's disaster fund is enough to handle immediate needs. But more money will be needed given the magnitude of the storm. The FEMA administrator is calling it a landmark event.
We have not seen an event like this. You could not draw this forecast up. You could not dream this forecast up.
President Trump claims his proposed budget cuts to FEMA will not affect the relief efforts, and Congress will be responsible for drawing up a Hurricane Harvey recovery package. Not far from where the president visited today, a Catholic woman in Robstown, Texas, says a sign of hope stands among the destruction of Harvey.
As you can see, the statue was the only thing that survived. I dug in there for things, and all I found was a Virgin Mary.
And President Trump has assured all of those affected by Harvey of the country's prayers.
More federal aid for hurricane relief will likely come in a temporary spending bill to prevent a government shutdown on October 1st. But congressional aides say the larger recovery package may take more time to develop. Lauren.
Mark, how will this disaster aid package affect other legislative agenda items this fall?
It will make for a packed September. You can add this relief package to a list that includes preventing a government shutdown, making sure the government doesn't default on its debt obligations, and laying the groundwork for tax reform. Tomorrow, the president will be promoting tax overhaul in Missouri.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. Floodwaters blocked a Houston priest from getting to his church. And while the French-Canadian didn't walk on water, he did find a way across the floods. Jason Calvi shares the story of faith in the storm.
With 30 inches of water swamping parts of Houston, Father David Bergeron knew his flock couldn't drive to Sunday Mass. But the avid kayaker knew just what to do. He brought faith to the flooded streets. We talked to him on FaceTime at the Catholic Charismatic Center in Houston.
So I hope that the kayak brought hope, just like in the old days when America was evangelized. They came with canoes, so I did not have a canoe, I had a kayak, but this was to bring hope to the new world.
Hope needed in this place where people have lost everything: photos, books, and clothes.
I think we always need to keep calm, and St. Peter did some things that were incredible, like he walked on the waters, and he was able to do that because he was focusing on Jesus. So for us to also focus on Jesus, to keep calm.
Father Bergeron is finally on dry land.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee.
But the Catholic Charismatic Center isn't out of the water yet.
I don't know if you can see some of the water.
For this priest, the flooding didn't wash away his commitment to spreading the seeds of faith.
May the Lord bless you and myself, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Father Bergeron went out in his kayak to buy wine to offer Mass for stranded people on Sunday, but the liquor laws wouldn't allow sales before noon. Father tells me he was able to celebrate Mass today with about 7 people. He says many parishioners are still stranded in their homes.
You know, we at EWTN have Mass on our network twice a day, and that's a place for people to turn.
And we did get a letter actually from a family, a cruise family in Houston. They said they're stranded by the waters, unable to get to Mass on Sunday. They watched our network for that Mass, said it brought them great relief and comfort during this trying time.
Jason Calvi, thank you so much for your report. And we have a crew in Texas. Video journalist Paul Fifield and correspondent Wyatt Goolsby, who is from Houston, just arrived. Wyatt, what can you tell us?
Well, Lauren, my parents, my younger brother, I even have extended family members like my cousins. They're all trapped in their homes and their apartments as floodwaters are preventing them from even being able to leave their neighborhood. Paul and I are just north of the greater Houston area in Huntsville, where we are driving right now in heavy rain, and we're on our way to interview the longtime Catholic pastor of St. Ignatius of Loyola Church in Spring, Texas. His church took some serious damage, even getting a lot of floodwaters into their chapel, which is dedicated to Our Lady. In the meantime, though, he has seen some amazing acts of heroism, so we're going to be following that and bringing that to you.
Thank you, Wyatt. Stay safe, you and Paul. We will have continuing coverage, including reports from Wyatt Goolsby from Texas for the rest of the week. The ACLU files a lawsuit in federal court on behalf of 6 transgender members of the military, along with people who want to enlist. On Friday, the president directed the Pentagon to implement a ban on transgender individuals from enlisting or continuing to serve. The ACLU is asking the court to declare this action invalid. President Trump says all options are on the table when responding to North Korea's missile launch over Japan this morning. It fired a mid-range ballistic missile designed to carry a nuclear payload. It flew over Japan before crashing into the northern Pacific Ocean. The aggressive launch sent a clear message of defiance as Washington and South Korea are conducting war games nearby. The South Korean president said the exercise was conducted after President Moon Jae-in directed the military to display a strong capability to punish the North if need be. President Donald Trump got on the phone. He called Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Both are agreeing to increase pressure on Pyongyang. The two leaders spoke for nearly an hour yesterday. Abe says North Korea's launch poses a serious threat to Japan. Iran has dismissed a demand for the inspection of Iranian military sites. The country's government spokesman says the demand by Ambassador Nikki Haley wasn't worth any attention. Earlier last week, Haley said the U.S. wants inspection of Iranian sites to determine its compliance with the landmark 2015 nuclear deal. And a landslide in southern China buries dozens of homes. 3 people are dead, and more than 30 others are missing. Survivors of the landslide are in stable condition. State media says the rescue operation is ongoing. The fate of a Catholic priest and 40 hostages taken captive in May by ISIS in the Philippines remains uncertain. UCA News says ISIS is moving out of the town Marawi, where the group was taken, but government officials haven't discussed the hostages. About 700 people have died in the fighting there, including 45 civilians. The Office of the Venezuelan Bishops' Conference is cleaning up after a robbery. Various items were stolen Friday after unidentified people broke into the building. It comes as the country is increasing frustration over the lack of basic necessities. This is not the first time a place belonging to the church has suffered such an attack. And you can read more about this break-in and see more images at CatholicNewsAgency.com. An exciting day for EWTN as we open a new studio, this one at the Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham, England. Monsignor John Armitage, Rector, Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham, joins us from Walsingham, England. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Very good to be with you.
The name of EWTN's new studio is the Annunciation House, and the official opening took place today. Tell us about this new facility.
Well, this is a remarkable new facility of EWTN right in the centre of the village of Walsingham. It's in one of the old houses that take place, that is part of a place called Friday Market, right in the middle of the shrine. And the facility is absolutely a wonderful ability in here in Walsingham to be able to have this great facility for the new media here at Walsingham. So we're very excited.
EWTN is hoping to advance its mission of evangelization throughout Europe and the world. Why is the shrine the perfect place to do that?
The heart of the message of Walsingham is the Annunciation. That's why the new studio is called Annunciation House. And so the ability to be able to spread the message that was given here over 950 years ago was the message of Our Lady, where she said, build a holy house in honour of my Annunciation. And so to be able to have this wonderful facility here at Walsingham continues the mission of the church in this area to spread the good news about the Word who became flesh and lived among us.
You call the village the Holy Mile. Why?
Because when the pilgrims walked from all over the country and indeed all over Europe, when they got within a mile of the village, they took their shoes off and walked the last mile barefoot. And that holy mile is still with us, and many of our pilgrims, as they come towards Walsingham, still have that practice. And the Holy Mile is the route from what's called the Slipper Chapel, which is really the only building that survived the destruction of the Reformation. So they walk from the Slipper Chapel into the village.
Fascinating. Well, best of luck to you, Monsignor John Armitage, with the Annunciation House, EWTN's new studio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good night and God bless.
Coming up, one woman's personal story of trying to adopt in Russia and her pain of never knowing if she will be able to. And remembering the victims of the USS McCain collision. Russia's economic minister says the country isn't suffering as a result of U.S. and EU sanctions. Maxim Oreshkin says the negative effect of sanctions is behind us and that the Russian economy is on track to grow at least 2% this year. That's an increase, the first increase since sanctions and the war in Ukraine plunged Russia into recession. The Associated Press has reported Russia's ban on U.S. adoptions 4 years ago is still having disastrous results for orphans in Russia. The ban served as retaliation for a U.S. law targeting alleged Russian human rights violators. More than 200 U.S. families were in the process of adopting a child in Russia. Many of those children have been placed in Russian homes, but the fate of others is unknown. That is the case for our next guest. Joining us now is Courtney Clark via Skype from Birmingham, Alabama. She and her husband traveled to Russia to adopt a 2-year-old boy in 2012. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's been almost 5 years since you first saw the boy you were calling your son when you were in Russia. He was 2 years old at the time at an orphanage, and here you are in a picture holding him. How upset are you?
It's just been devastating for us. This is a little boy that we love dearly. He was the first child to ever call me mom. We have wanted him in our home. We want to care for him and provide for him, and we just haven't been able to.
Have you had any contact with him? Do you know where he is?
No, we really don't. Not since we left the orphanage in December 2012. We have not been able to talk to him or find out.
You sent an intent to adopt. You signed an intent to adopt.
Yes.
And what happened with that? Did you ever hear from the government again?
We really haven't. When Russia closed adoptions in January of 2013, they cut off all the families who had not been through court. And so we were one of those families. There's about 250 other families in our situation who had met their children, promised them that we were coming back, signed all the paperwork Russia had asked of us, but have not.
Just heartbreaking. Well, here's a picture of you and your family. You haven't given up on adoption. You've adopted 2 children from the U.S. You have 2 biological children. Are you going to give up on Josiah?
No, we're not. We're going to do everything we can, and we feel like we're his parent, and it's our job just to keep fighting for him.
This summer, Congress has passed sanctions against Russia, the probe against the Trump administration for trying to influence the U.S. presidential election continues, but it does not seem like the media is covering this Russian story. Why do you think the U.S. isn't doing more to pressure Putin on behalf of these children?
I think for us and for the families like us, this is just a forgotten story. We feel like there's been so much back and forth with the political nature of everything that's happened, and we just want people to remember that these are real children and real families that are involved. They're parents who desperately want their children.
Parents who desperately want their children. Thank you so much, Courtney Clark, waiting for an adoption for her son, Josiah, from Russia.
Thank you.
We reported yesterday divers recovered the remains of all 10 sailors who died after the USS John S. McCain collided with an oil tanker last week near Singapore. Tonight, we honor those victims. First-class technicians Charles Finley, Abraham Lopez, second-class technician Kevin Bushell, Jacob Drake, Timothy Eccles Jr., Corey Ingram, third-class technician Dustin Doyon, John Hoagland III, Logan Palmer, and Kenneth Smith. They ranged in age from 20 to 39 years old and came from 8 U.S. states. Our prayers are with these 10 men and their families. You're watching EWTN News Nightly. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Up next, college degrees and religious beliefs. Is there a connection? We'll discuss with Pew Research Center's Greg Smith. And a new Pope-mobile for a visit to Colombia. What else the country is doing to celebrate the papal trip. Today we remember the martyrdom of St. John the Baptist. John the Baptist was known for evangelization and for baptizing Jesus Christ. King Herod authorized the killing of John sometime between 33 and 36 AD. A new Pew Research Center study finds that adults in the U.S. with a college degree are less religious than others. But this pattern does not hold up among Christians. The data show that of Christians with college degrees, 52% attend services weekly, 74% believe in God, and 67% pray daily. Our next guest can break down the study for us. Greg Smith is the Associate Director of Research at Pew Research Center, where he coordinates the center's domestic polling on religion. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to have you here. It seems to me like those numbers that we just saw were pretty high. And I'm wondering why those with college degrees are less religious. It seems like the numbers were up there.
That certainly does seem to be the case among Christians. You know, the idea that higher levels of education are associated with lower levels of religious observance has been a commonplace in the public discussion for decades. But what the study shows is that at least among Christians, among the 7 in 10 Americans who identify themselves as Christians, that's not the case. In fact, college-educated Christians are just as religious, if not more religious, than some of their counterparts with lower levels of education. It seems to be, in some ways, at least when it comes to attendance at religious services, in fact, college-educated Christians do that more often than Christians with...
Let's take a look at the Christian religions that you compared of those college-educated who attend weekly services. 68% of evangelical Protestants attend, 45% of Catholics, and 85% of Mormons. What do you gather from that? What do you learn from that?
Well, part of what you're seeing reflected in those data are some of the overall patterns that we see when we look at American religion. Mormons and evangelical Christians tend to be more religiously observant than many other faiths, including Catholics, including mainline Protestants, including members of other faiths. But within all 3 of those religious traditions, one of the things they have in common is that college graduates actually attend religious services more often than those with less education.
And why is that?
Well, it's hard to say why it is, but one of the things we know about college graduates in general is that they tend to participate in all kinds of things at higher rates than people with less education. They're more involved in their communities on average. They're more involved with things like PTAs, and these data show that they're more likely to attend religious services.
I was shocked in reading this report that only 1/4 of Jewish college graduates say religion is very important to them. Why is that, do you think?
Well, again, I think what you're seeing there is that, that these patterns whereby higher levels of education are linked with higher levels of observance, it's really specific to Christians. We know in the Jewish community in the United States and around the world, there is a tradition of secular Judaism. There are many Jews in the United States and elsewhere who are Jewish by means of culture, ancestry, and ethnicity, even if they're not particularly religiously observant.
Fascinating study. Thank you so much. I'm glad you guys do this. It's really helpful in covering religion.
That's very kind of you. Thank you for having me.
Greg Smith, the Associate Director of Research at Pew Research Center. Well, we have reported before that Father Solanus Casey will be declared blessed during a beatification mass in Detroit in November, and now we know more about that day. Mass will begin at 4 p.m. at Ford Field in downtown Detroit on November 18th. The Capuchin Franciscans announced yesterday that tickets will be made public starting Monday, October 9th at fordfield.com. In May, Pope Francis announced Father Solanus would be elevated to blessed, the final step before sainthood. The friar spent years in Detroit helping the poor. He'll be the 2nd American-born male to be beatified after Father Stanley Rother. As Pope Francis prepares to visit Colombia next month, we get a peek at his wheels. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos unveiled the Pope Mobile that's being used next week. A commemorative stamp has been released to celebrate the papal visit. Pope Francis will be in the Latin American country from September 6th through the 11th. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you tonight with some powerful photos released by the U.S. Coast Guard showing their rescues in and around Houston over the weekend. Our prayers are with Texas tonight. Good night, and God bless you.